In this video, we'll be learning how to create our own custom types of callouts that can be used with Quarto. This blue callout that we see up here at the top is one of the built-in types of callouts you can create using Quarto, and this one is created using the callout-note class, and the purple one below is the one that we'll be working towards making in this video. This is not one of the built-in types of callouts from Quarto, but rather one that we can create ourselves using a bit of custom CSS. The first thing that we'll do is open up our studio and then go to File, New File, Quarto Document, and call this Custom Callouts, and I'm going to save this file. Next, we're going to create a custom CSS file. So I'll go to File, New File, Text File, and then I'm going to save this as custom.scss. I'm also just going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. And then in the YAML of our Quarto document, we're going to add our custom theme using the following syntax. And before we can put any custom CSS into this file, the first thing that we need to do is copy and paste this line of code into the .scss file. Then we can include custom CSS as long as it's below that line in the file. I'm going to start by creating a callout using one of the existing types of callouts that's built into Quarto. So for the usual syntax, the title of the callout starts with the two hashtags, and then the actual content inside the callout, we type it below the title of the callout. Let's render that. And there's a few things to note here. If we take a look at the documentation for callouts in Quarto, there are a few different options that we can select. There are 3 different looks you can use. Here we're using the default appearance. This has a colored header and an icon. And there's also an option to turn the icon off, but in our example, the icon is present. And there's also one other thing that's special about this, and that is the fact that we've added a custom title here. So if I were to remove this title, it's going to by default just say note. So let's re-render that just to demonstrate what that looks like. So if you don't include any title at all on your callout, then it has like a default title. So for this one, it just says note, but I'm going to put back the custom title that we had here. What that means is that in this video, we're going to try to replicate the CSS for this callout, but specifically we're trying to replicate the CSS for a callout that has a custom title, does have an icon, and uses the default styling appearance as opposed to simple or minimal. And that'll be important when we're dealing with the CSS in just a minute. One way to create the custom callout would be to write some CSS completely from scratch, but there's an easier way to go about things, and that is to use the CSS that's in the source code for Quarto and then just modify it as we need. Right now I'm on the GitHub repository for Quarto, and there's a search bar up here at the top, and I'm going to search for callout, and there's a lot of different files here that deal with callouts, but the one that we're interested in is this one right here, the styles-callout.html. And if I click on this file, I can see that even though this is an HTML file, it contains entirely CSS, and this is actually the file that defines all of the styling for the callouts that are built into Quarto. And if we scroll through here, we can see that there are those different styles, like we saw the simple style, the default style. And if we scroll through here a little bit, we'll be able to see that there are different aspects to the callout box. There's the high-level callout box itself, but then there's also a callout body or callout content, as well as a header or a title. And then there's also CSS that defines the icon. Now, given that we're only trying to replicate the CSS for a callout box that has a custom title, an icon, and the default appearance, we can actually ignore most of this CSS. For example, anything here that says style simple, we don't need to care about, as well as anything that says no icon or not titled. Those parts just aren't going to be relevant for us. What we'll need to do is create 4 different classes to start out with. The first one is going to be that high-level overall container for the callout. I'm going to call this solution box because I think there's a good chance that there's already a class in Quarto called solution. So just to make sure that I'm not overriding some existing class or using a word that I shouldn't use, I'm going to call this solution box. And then I'm also going to create a class for the icon, and I'll call that solution box icon. Similarly, we'll create one for the header or the title, and we'll create one for the body of the callout box. This is where all of the content will actually go. To fill in the first class, I'm going to go back to the Quarto CSS, and I'm going to be copying and pasting in anything that just says callout without any other sort of subclass with it. So here I'm going to copy lines 4 to 6 and paste that in. I'm going to ignore the style simple and go to the style default, paste that in. I'll ignore anything that's a subclass. So here this is body container, body, so on. We can ignore all of that. Titles, icons, again, we can ignore. And if we keep scrolling, the only other thing that will go in our first class is going to be the color of the border. So this purple color right here. I'll copy and paste that in as well. And I'm going to change this blue color to a purple color. For the second class, this is for the icon, and we're going to do a very similar thing. We'll flip back to the CSS, scroll up to the top, and we're going to look for anything that says icon on it. Line 90 is the first spot where it says icon, but this one is for the simple style, and we want the default style. So we'll copy and paste this part right here. Here's another spot that says icon, so I'm copying that as well. Here's another spot that says icon, and this one says titled. And because we do have a custom title, I'm going to copy and paste that. You'll notice that those 2 lines are the exact same properties that we just defined before. But because this has a title, the class that had the title on here is the one that we're going to want to go with rather than this one up here. So I'll erase the one from before and keep the one that's more specific to our case, which is the one with the title. And then the last thing that says icon is for the background image. So we'll copy that line of code, paste it in, and then this URL is really long. We're going to erase all of that, and we're going to replace this image with whatever image we want to use for the icon. On mine, I'm trying to create a solution, so like a problem and solution sort of idea, and an icon that kind of makes sense for that idea would be this screwdriver and wrench. To find that image, I went to fontawesome.com/search and then looked for wrench. And if you toggle to free, there's a screwdriver wrench option, and there's an option to download the SVG file. So I'm downloading that and I'm putting it in the same folder as where my QMD file is. And then we'll put the name of the file inside of the URL right here. And it was called screwdriver wrench solid.svg. The next class is for the header, and this is where our title will go. Same idea as before, we scroll to the top of this CSS, and then we look for anything that says header or title. I see this one here that says callout title. I'll copy and paste that. Then there's one down here that says style default, callout title. Again, copy and paste. We'll take this one as well. And then down here, we can add a background color to our header. I'm going to replace this blue color with a light purple. And finally, we just have the body left. Here's a callout body for the default style. We'll take that one. And I'm going to take this one as well. And now we have the base of this CSS. We'll still need to make a few slight adjustments, but let's take a look at what this looks like so far. With the built-in callouts, you can just use this sort of syntax, but because we've created our own custom set of classes, we're going to need to use a bit different of a syntax to use those classes that we created. First, we have our solution box, and then inside of the solution box, we're going to put the header, and then underneath the header, we're going to put the body, and finally, inside of the header, that's where we'll include the icon. Let's add a title. Notice here that I'm not putting the 2 hashtags in front of it. I'm just leaving it as regular text. And let's put the body content inside of this part right here. And now let's render. And this is what we get. This looks pretty close to correct, but there's a few things that we're going to want to change. First, let's get rid of this extra spacing that's on top of the header. To fix that, I'm going to remove this margin top. Let's save and re-render. Next, I don't like this extra space that's along here on the bottom. And here's how we can fix that. This was a lot of trial and error, as well as a bunch of back and forth with ChatGPT to figure out exactly how to do this. My initial thought was to change either the margin or the padding on the top or the bottom, but that wasn't doing what I needed. So luckily ChatGPT was able to figure this part out for me. And once we re-render, that extra space should now be gone. And the text is in a little bit of a weird position, so let's move that around as well. One thing that we want to do is create a bit of extra space between the icon and the text. So in the icon class, we're going to increase the padding on the right of the image. Again, this was trial and error. I'm increasing it to 1.25, and that'll add some additional padding on the right side of the icon. And this text is a little bit too high, so I want to move it down a little bit and have it be more aligned with that icon. My first instinct was to add some padding on the top, like so, within the solution box header, but unfortunately that doesn't give the desired effect. Instead, it moves everything down, but we only want the text to be moved down. So we'll remove that from the solution box header, and we're going to create a new one. And we're saying here that we only want this to apply to the paragraph text inside of the solution box header. Now this almost looks identical. The only thing left is that there's a little bit of extra spacing at the very bottom of the box. If we go back to the quarto-CSS, we can see that there's something here that says callout body and callout content, and this one is only going to apply to the last child within all this other stuff. So we're going to copy and paste this entire thing, put it at the bottom of our file, and we're going to replace all this part that's highlighted right here with solution box body, save and re-render. And now that extra space is removed. And there we have it. We created our own custom callout that looks basically identical to the ones that are built into Quarto. There's some very small slight differences, and you could definitely spend hours tinkering with the CSS to make it look perfect, but I think this looks pretty good, and I don't think that most people would notice any differences between it upon first glance, at least. One thing that I will mention here is that the icon in the built-in callouts are usually the same color as the left border, and you could totally do that here as well. It's just that the image that we downloaded happens to be that color. This is what that image looks like. So if I wanted, I could go into Photoshop and edit this color. In order to modify this, it did get a little bit pixelated. It had to rasterize the SVG. I'll save this one as a PNG, and then let's change this to .png, re-render, and this time the icon should show up as purple. And the only other thing that looks different to me still is the outline. So I wonder if I change this to be a little bit smaller, if that would improve things at all. I think that looks a little closer. They look basically identical to me at this point, but let me know if there's anything I missed. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope that you found it helpful, and let me know if you create any custom callout classes of your own.